Hello, you're watching Tell It Like It Is, and my name is Kathy Benuck. Today will be a very fascinating show. The name of it is Immunization, the Case for. Now let me give you a little bit of a background. Many of you, I know, are aware that during the past few years there have been parents around the country who have decided to refuse having their children vaccinated because they believe that vaccines are harmful and are of the belief that vaccines do more harm than good. In the mid-1980s, a woman who says that vaccines cause serious injury to her child formed an organization called the National Vaccine Information Center. And apparently her goal was to educate people about the perils of vaccine as she saw it. And she wanted to begin a movement through which people would feel, I guess, emboldened would be a good word, to challenge such things as any existing requirements that their children had to be vaccinated before they were allowed to enter school. So before long, there did develop kind of a loose network of like-minded people around the country, and volunteers began to advocate their positions before state agencies, state legislatures, and even before the National Center for Disease Control. So, such activity did result in some states allowing some exemptions for parents who did not want their children to be vaccinated. In fact, 19 states, I believe, right now allow exemptions for children whose parents purely have philosophical objections to vaccines. Now, here in New Hampshire, as I understand it, exemptions are not granted so widely. But an exemption can be obtained if a child's physician says that a child could be adversely affected by a vaccine. So I guess a good example would be for if a child was undergoing chemotherapy for cancer, a doctor might be concerned that an immune system deficiency maybe would warrant some care with giving that child some vaccines. But New Hampshire also allows a religious exemption that, to me, in my opinion, appears to be kind of loosey-goosey, because for that, a parent simply needs to fill out a form, have it notarized, and then bring it on down to their local school system. And every November, schools in New Hampshire report those back to the state for statistical purposes. There is not a review board of any kind that reviews really the validity of any of these religious objections. The National Vaccine Information Center does have volunteers in New Hampshire, and they also have a volunteer New Hampshire Director of Advocacy, and that person, some of you may know, is Laura Condon of Bedford. Late summer 2012, Laura approached me and told me that she'd like to do a Tell It Like It Is show so that she could do a presentation on the dangers of vaccine. Now, I'll be honest with you, and I was with her. I don't object to vaccines, but I told her that I'd consider it. So over the following weeks, even months, I kind of here and there started studying the whole issue. And quite frankly, I became personally concerned about the risks, what I believe to be the risks associated with allowing people to forego any or all vaccines. So I contacted Laura, and I told her that I would do a show with her, and that I would make every attempt to be completely fair in allowing her to express her points of view without me arguing with her. But I also told her that I would do that show only on the condition that I would also tape a show with a medical expert who would address the value and the positive results of immunizations, particularly the history of them through the years. I also told Laura that I would give her permission to post the show with her on her organization's website, but I did put down two non-negotiable conditions. The first was that the entire show be posted, not just excerpts that they may have decided were very favorable to their point of view, and only they could post the show if also posted was the show done with the medical expert who would talk in favor of immunizations. And I also advised her that she would not receive any questions that I would ask her in advance, nor would she see the show with any medical expert if one happened to be done before the one with her. And as a matter of fact, she wouldn't see the show until both shows would be released at the same time, regardless of any time span that might occur between the taping of both shows. So she agreed, and I went ahead and I approached the New Hampshire Medical Society, and I asked for their assistance in securing a medical expert for the pro-immunization show. So anyway, backtracking again, the show with Laura was taped in late February. And I then was forced to postpone the scheduled show with the medical expert due to my own forced hiatus from taping shows while dealing with a major health challenge. So here we are, finally today. The pro-immunization show is being taped right now. Now, my intent is that both of these shows will air during the same schedules on public access television. However, I don't have control of those shows. So if while you're watching this show today, you're unable to watch the other show, or it hasn't been available to you yet, please go to the show website, www.tellitlikeItisNH.com. You will see both shows on that website, and you can view them both. It's important that you hear both points of view. Now, okay, I said that I approached the Medical Society in New Hampshire asking for their help in securing somebody, and they were wonderful and did find a perfect person who is very patient while I work my way up to introducing him. And my guest today, I'm happy to say, is Dr. David Clark Fredenburg, who has been a practicing physician now for the past 31 years, and as a pediatrician has literally treated thousands and thousands of children. He's recognized as an expert on vaccine-preventable diseases by his peers and I guess nationwide, because he's done many, many presentations on the subject. Dr. Fredenburg is a native of Washington, D.C. He earned his bachelor's degree with high distinction in human biology from the University of Virginia, and he then went on to earn his master's degree from the University of Massachusetts Graduate School, right in Amherst, Mass. From there, he went to the Medical College of Virginia, where he earned his MD, and then went on to the Medical Center Hospital of the University of Vermont College of Medicine, where he completed both his internship and his residency in pediatrics. He then traveled to Crow Agency in Montana to serve as a pediatrician and their director of maternal and child health at the Indian Health Service Hospital, and he also began a 4-year service as a commissioned officer of the United States Public Health Service. He then went to Rapid City, South Dakota to serve as a pediatrician and field health officer for the Indian Health Service Hospital in that city. He then returned east to join a New York private medical practice, and while there, he became the pediatric liaison for the Miracle Children's Network, which I'm sure you've all heard of. Dr. Fredenburg became an official New Englander when in 1991 he served as a pediatrician in a large medical practice in northern Massachusetts, and then finally he was lured to New Hampshire to be a pediatrician with the Nashua Medical Group and with the Southern New Hampshire Medical Foundation. In 1997, he established his own pediatric office practice in Hudson, New Hampshire. And he was a busy guy because he became chairman of the pediatric department at the Southern New Hampshire Medical Center, became a preceptor for both Rivier Colleges and St. Joseph's Hospital schools of nursing, as well as for the Massachusetts School of Pharmacy and Applied Services. Among many other things, he was elected to the executive committee of the Hillsborough Medical Society, and he serves in leadership with several medical associations and organizations, and is a fellow with the American Academy of Pediatrics. I could talk all day about all the things he's done, but currently he practices medicine at Bedford Pediatrics, and he works in pediatric emergency medicine at Lawrence General Hospital, where he's also a preceptor for family practice residents. On top of that, he's a professor and the medical director of Masters in Physician Assistant Studies programs in both Manchester, New Hampshire, and Worcester, Mass. And believe it or not, he's also within months of getting yet another graduate degree. this time from the UNH Graduate School of Public Health. Now, Dr. Fredenburg is certified by the American Board of Pediatrics and the National Board of Medical Examiners, and he's been licensed to practice medicine in the states of Vermont, Montana, New York, Maine, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and Arkansas. He's certified in neonatal resuscitation, in pediatric advanced life support, and advanced cardiac life support. He now is a Hudson, New Hampshire resident and has been for a while, and is married with 2 sons. I don't know how he does it, but in addition to all of this, he enjoys woodworking, kayaking, and sailing. And wait until you hear this. He plays baritone saxophone with the Windham Community Concert Band and the Windham Swing Band, and on top of that is a member of the Nashua Symphony Chorus. I don't know how you found the time to get here today, but I am really glad to see you. I don't know with a schedule like that how you even have time to
Well,
breathe.
some of them I'm not doing. I mean, Nashua Symphony Chorus and concert band.
Yeah.
I still play with the swing band.
Yeah.
I only have 2
Are you
licenses.
a wild man when you're up there
No.
on stage?
No.
No?
My wife has questions about my sanity and my schedule.
Yeah, but that's kind of typical, too.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I think so.
Well, I do appreciate you being here, believe me. I'm going to throw some questions at you, and of course you really don't know what I'm going to ask you, because we did not do a script or anything like that. And my questions are going to be kind of general so that the audience can kind of be walked through some things. And you know best what you're talking about. So please don't feel limited by the questions. I mean, anything that you feel needs to be part of your answers, I want you to go for it. Okay?
And you can rein me in when you need to.
Oh, I don't think I have to rein you in. The
We'll
only thing
see.
I'll have to do, well, you might have to rein me in because I'm supposed to keep an eye on the clock, and I've been known to not do that. So I'll rely on you to occasionally glance
Okay.
at it too, okay?
I see it.
All right. Well, anyway, during the introduction, I mentioned that the guest on the show dealing with the anti-immunization movement represents the National Vaccine Information Center. And they make some pretty, my research and different things that went on with the show, they make some pretty dramatic accusations, like doctors are taught to ignore patients' complaints about vaccine side effects on their children, that the media, because they get lots of money through pharmaceutical company advertising, usually won't cover any news about anti-vaccine arguments or alleged problems caused by vaccines. They say that vaccine mandates, vaccination programs, and public information campaigns about vaccines are largely to keep grants and federal money rolling into states. And they also said that newly vaccinated people are more of a threat to public health than someone who refuses vaccinations. Now, what do you know about this National Vaccine Information Center? And can they back up any of these claims?
I know of them only through Ms. Condon, and I know she's been conscientious in following some state legislative changes we've had for vaccine funding.
Here in
But
New Hampshire.
beyond that, I would know very little about the organization.
It's not a professional organization, correct?
Not that I know of, but I don't really know much about it.
Okay.
There have been a number of organizations through the years. We all know Andrew Wakefield, who was the one that put out the publication that's since been retracted about autism and MMR.
Yes, and I have a lot of questions about that.
He actually is someone who has been credited with being a great publicist, somewhat more than being a scientist. He
was a good publicist,
So in a lot of ways, the idea that they aren't getting their message out, or that the media has not responded to their message, is a little weak if we look at the history of how they respond.
Yeah, because that was all over the news.
Yes, and when it was retracted, I would say by the magazine that put it out, the journal, the coverage of that was there, but it wasn't nearly in the same strength as it was for the claims of the damage.
Yes.
And all. That was the beginning of sort of the most recent flurry of anti-vaccine. When he put that out, it was only based on about 12 children. And as best we can tell, all that data was not clean. There were very few kids who actually had the right diagnosis.
All right, yeah, I found that.
So the
just
ethics
doing
of the
some
study
research,
was quite interesting with that. As far as when did vaccine, you made this in your introduction, I think it's worth mentioning, the anti-vaccine movement goes back to cowpox vaccine.
It does?
Yeah.
That far?
When Jenner found out about that cowpox would protect people from the naturally occurring smallpox, and he found this out because the milk ladies who milked the cows would get pustules on their hands, and they didn't get the disease, the smallpox.
Wow.
And he started to inoculate other children. He did one child, and the child seemed to be protected. And in fact, it was not a great vaccine. It caused quite a bit of disease, but relative to the naturally occurring.
Right?
That was the beginning of the game.
Yeah, yeah.
And what was the term was variolation. That actually started in China.
Ah,
When
that I did not know.
I believe an emperor's or some court dignitary wanted to protect his family, and he asked the physician to show me a way to do this with some of it. The end point is that it's always been there. People, when we tamper with things that are thought to be natural, people have problems with that. At the same time, you have to start looking at what benefits you find against what injuries occur.
Isn't natural, basically, you're born, you live, you die.
In my experience, the death pattern has been very
That's
different
natural,
since vaccination. But
Yeah, well, I mean, since medicine has ever started, there's constantly been means that have been developed that keep us alive longer and keep us healthier and so on and so forth. So, I mean, vaccinations is only one kind of small part of
it's
all
a small
that.
area. But it has had a profound effect. I trained actually when we had about half or less than half of the current vaccines on the shelf. And sadly to say, I've missed out on all the conspiracies. I've never been paid for promoting vaccines other than giving the shots as an administration
So the rumor that
charge.
you guys are just
Well, I've
setting
missed
up
out.
Cayman Island bank accounts
I
through all
wish
the money
I
isn't
could
true?
say that I was more clever, but I haven't found the conspiracy to my benefit in any
Not
shape
at
or
all.
form. In fact, if you want to look at it, when I started my office or when I started practicing, I got to do spinal taps quite readily. Parents would, one of the biggest fears parents would convey was, I think my child has meningitis.
Yeah.
And I would say the number of parents that I've seen in the last decade who have come up to me and said, I think my child has meningitis, have been nil, because we don't see it the way we used to. But a spinal tap every week, twice a week, was not uncommon. Finding meningitis every month or two was not uncommon. Those children, more than half of them, do not come out of it cleanly, neurologically, hearing, whatever. In the last 4 or 5 years, I've only gotten to do about 3 spinal taps.
Wow.
One was Lyme
That's a huge
disease.
difference.
One was herpes, which is another we don't have a vaccine for. And the other one actually was a clean tap. So it's a very different, well, in the long run, I've lost money because I'm not doing half the procedures. I'm not admitting the kids the way I have to in the past.
That's true.
So as far as the conspiratorial thing, it hasn't flown very well. I'm afraid I'm losing out on it.
Yeah, well, I'm not a big conspiracy theorist on anything, quite frankly. You know, I mean, that kind of... Now, you mentioned, which kind of segues into my next question, how many more vaccines have become developed and available and so on since you even started your own practice.
Currently,
what diseases have been immunized against with vaccines? And I mean, at this stage in time, a lot of them have been around for a long time, like the polio vaccine, for example. What have the results been? Have vaccines really been proven to be true preventers of diseases?
You're going to find argument no matter how you do it, but as best we can tell, yes, they've made a tremendous difference. You're going to see a graph that's shown very often in the anti-vaccine movement. It was even shown in some of the MPH classes I took this fall, showing the decline in death rate for a number of diseases over the last 100 years. What they don't show is the case rate where you give the vaccine and all of a sudden the cases really die off here. People were surviving. There were ways to keep people alive with a number of the diseases. Many of the hygienic movement where they started cleaning up the streets, where they would quarantine, which is a whole other issue we get into, is to go back to the idea that we can hold your family in your house for 3 weeks and quarantine you. I can't imagine what the civil rights issues about that would be these days.
That'd be huge.
But a lot of those did have effects, and they were helpful. The number of things that we are vaccinating for now is a large number. We start with hepatitis B, and actually hepatitis B is the newborn. And we can get into each of these, but
that's actually something that Laura stated her opposition to.
At 2 months, we're hitting diphtheria, tetanus, pertussis, polio, Haemophilus influenza type B, otherwise Hib, pneumococcal, and rotavirus. When I trained, we had polio and DPT, diphtheria, tetanus, pertussis.
When my children were infants.
And there was no Hep B at that point.
And they did wind up getting chicken pox.
And they got chicken pox? Which is a whole nother topic we can get. But anyway, those are continued through the first year, then MMR, varicella, chickenpox, varicella, and hepatitis A are introduced in the second year. Influenza is encouraged after 6 months of age. And it's 17 vaccines right now is what we're dealing with in the adolescents.
And that's what, like the course of what, first 5-6 years of
no,
the kid's life?
that's through adolescence.
Oh, right through. Oh, okay.
Hepatitis.
Well, yeah, because there's the new one for girls.
Right,
for
HPV,
which
human
is what, 12
papillomavirus.
years thereabout.
11 and 12, and meningococcal as well.
Okay.
At that age group.
Okay.
Those are the ones we're doing. But again, the ones I dealt with were pretty much DPT, polio, MMR, measles, mumps, and rubella. I think in flu we had coming up to a point.
Yeah, and polio.
That's what I
We all
trained
got
on.
the polio.
Polio was there with that too.
Yeah.
And that's what I trained on. Haemophilus influenza B and pneumococcal have taken otitis, ear infections down substantially. Meningitis is almost missing entirely from my
body. I never hear of it now. Yeah.
Right.
Well, I mean, when I was a kid growing up, I mean, it was a given that at some point in time you would get German measles, you would get chicken pox. A lot of kids got the mumps, you know. And I mean, I don't ever remember when my kids were coming up, any of their classmates ever getting those things, and you never hear of it now. Well, I mean, I suppose you do, but it's certainly not a given in school.
Actually, most of the measles we're seeing now is an import from France.
Oh, yeah?
You know, most of we're importing. We have a trade imbalance with Europe on measles.
In more ways than one.
Well, we might as well do it with disease, too.
Yeah, what the heck. So, I mean, you know, as a non-medical, just consumer, observer, whatever you want to call me, I mean, to me, the results are pretty clear. Oh. So to somebody in medicine, you've got the scientific data. So obviously vaccines have worked.
Even take the scientific out of it, just because so much of the anti-vaccine feeling is not a scientific feeling.
Yeah.
It's this is too much, we're doing too much, we're interfering too much. We haven't tested things, whatever.
Well, like the holistic approach to everything, right?
What I'm seeing is very much a tremendous difference in what I see clinically and the damage I've seen done by diseases that at one time were common, which are not common anymore. And I've seen no other explanation as to why they're gone. Some people have arguments that it could be this or that, but I don't see the data they're presenting to show that to me.
No.
Where I do see the onset of a vaccine. Rotavirus is one that, just to think about, it in the United States it's not deadly. It's a gut virus. You blow out both ends, dehydrate. But we have pretty much a hospital or a clinic on every corner of the street that can get an IV in and rehydrate them. How in the third world, it's a devastating illness. Well, it's actually one of the highest. The year after we started that vaccine, the most recent one, that season disappeared.
Wow.
The number of admissions I had for severe diarrhea in the late part of the winter vanished on me.
Wow.
Yet again, another income reduction.
I know.
It's terrible, isn't
monthly
it?
checks
Yeah,
coming in
yeah.
the mail. Now, you know, there are people who, like Laura's group, that contend that immunizations are still being given for diseases, like we were just talking about, that we don't hear a lot about anymore, that we only see rare cases. So their contention is that then these immunizations should be dropped. I'm going to ask you this. What would happen if they were discontinued? Or if more and more of the population just decided, I'm not getting it?
Well,
What
we
are
know
going to be the results of
we
that?
know one disease that it's probably been accepted. Smallpox disappeared. Last case worldwide was 77. I think Somalia, except for a lab
I
accident.
heard that there was a couple in Washington State or something in the past couple of
No,
years.
we haven't. That one, the vaccine stopped because the side effects of the vaccine were worse
Really?
than the current disease rate.
I
We
kinda
weren't seeing the
remember-
disease.
I kind of remember having it like the badge of honor.
Yep,
You know,
with
they
your
would
little
be
patch.
showing all your friends the little
Most
scar.
of the people don't get that little scar anymore with
No,
it.
I know.
Polio has gone through a revision. The
Uh-huh.
original vaccine that was very effective in wiping out the disease was the oral vaccine.
Mm-hmm.
But it goes through your system. You can expose your family members if they're immunocompromised,
okay.
if they've
Okay.
got AIDS, if there are a number of different issues.
So you'd need to know a little
They
bit of
would
the
end
family
up,
history
you
there.
could end up causing severe disease in the family
Okay.
members from the vaccine.
Okay.
When they started to see that the vaccine was inducing more disease than disease coming naturally,
Mm-hmm.
they switched to the inactivated form, which you do not send to your relatives.
Okay.
So we have
Now,
actually
is that
changed.
a shot or still a
That's
drink?
a shot. That's a shot.
Okay.
So we went from the drink to the shot. And that actually is a change that was made in recognition that the vaccine was now more of a problem than the disease rate was. But we know from things like
And these reports would be coming from offices like yours,
they'd be
correct?
coming from offices, they'd be coming from surveillance. We have a VAERS, which is a vaccine adverse event
Okay.
system out of the CDC. It's not ideal, I'll admit. They're passive
Yeah, but
collection.
nothing's ideal.
They're
I mean,
passive.
nothing's foolproof.
Nothing's foolproof. It'd be nicer to have them
Yeah,
more
but
foolproof.
it's not.
And vaccine registries may help us with that to a point. But we know that certain diseases, and I saw this in my training, in 80, the whole cell pertussis, DPT vaccine, did have nasty reactions. I have no, it worked, but you'd have what could be called a hypotonic reaction where the baby went limp. You'd have some seizures that were thought to be associated with it, high fevers. People were reacting to the severity of those reactions, and a number of people started restricting the vaccine. The rate of pertussis went up at that point. And
It
that was
did.
the only time, in about 82, was the only time that I ever pronounced a kid dead from pertussis.
Wow.
It was a 2-month-old preemie that never was vaccinated.
And
Sibling
of
was
course,
damaged
preemies would be more
much
susceptible
more
too, wouldn't they?
to the disease.
Yeah.
Yeah. Since then, I have never not seen pertussis to speak of. Maybe a year or two that I didn't diagnose it. But we know from Washington State in 2010, where your issue of the conscientious objection or the philosophical objection, they have a very casual system where many, many residents may not be vaccinated. In 2010, we just saw the biggest surge they've had since the 1940s, I
Wow.
believe. They had 10 infant deaths. And again, they probably were avoidable, but for whatever reason, we're willing to throw them up as kind of fodder for the freedom not to vaccinate is part of the issue that comes up. And that's the difficult part for me, is the ethics involved in the vaccines,
Yeah, I can imagine.
which are very complicated, yes.
I can imagine.
So stopping the vaccine, we have seen patterns of recurrence, resurgence. And
Well, it almost seems like it would be inevitable. I mean, again, speaking as a layperson.
if you don't have immunity,
Yeah.
if enough people
Yeah.
around you don't have immunity,
Yeah.
you're going to get it.
I mean, as we all know, any of us who ever had kids, you know, when the kid goes to school, you know, they start bringing home crud.
Yeah. And hopefully it's crud
And
that
the
you
whole
can
family
survive.
yeah, the
but-
whole family winds up with it, you know. I mean,
But
it's
I've
part of the
seen
game.
enough cases where it wasn't crud that you
Oh, yeah,
that you
it's
came out
something more
cleanly from.
serious. Yeah, yeah. Now, you touched on it at the beginning, and it's certainly something that did get talked about during the previous show, and it's certainly something that is big on the national
Yeah.
kind of dialogue, and that's the whole contention that autism or PDD, pervasive development delay, is caused by vaccinations. But scientific research has not really been able to show merit to that charge. And one of the things I saw was that the anti-vaccine folks also point to a large increase in diagnosed autism cases. So anyway, I mean, this is kind of a long question, but what kind of known for that.
It's a long discussion, but
Yeah,
that's right.
really. Yeah. Well, when I reviewed the statistics on autism and records kept by the National Childhood Vaccination Injury Fund, it seems that the big increase in autism cases came about when the whole wave of hysteria started, when that researcher you mentioned claimed to have discovered the link between vaccines and autism. However, as other major research efforts were happening that were showing, much dispute to that claim, there was really a tremendously dramatic decrease in the numbers recorded by the Injury Fund. In fact, in the peak year of 2003, they reported that 2,437 cases, new cases of autism, were due to vaccines. But as the pandemonium died down by 2012, they reported only one link. Now, what do you know about this whole National Childhood Vaccination Injury Fund? How do they collect their data? And, I mean, in reality, isn't it safe to say that more autism cases are now, reported, starting in the early 80s or thereabouts, simply because there's more awareness that it exists? I mean, aren't there degrees of autism? Are all autistics disabled? Can an adult who went through their life all of a sudden be diagnosed as autistic? And, I mean, basically, have any causes of autism ever been discovered?
We don't know. We don't know. I mean, the issue of the vaccines was that it was being pointed at, whether you want to believe their data or not. The CDC, the government, has sent out a number of studies. They cannot find links between thimerosal, the preservative, and vaccines, between MMR and, or really any of the vaccines that are conclusive for the most part. They can say pretty solidly they can't see the link. Okay, so that has not really shown up within their data. Okay. Again, it's the government data, so we have to say how we're going to respond to it.
Childhood Vaccination
The Vaccination Injury Fund.
That's not government, is it?
Yeah, it is.
It is government.
What happened was, at one point, we were getting to a critical, and I don't have that history right in front of me, but we're getting to a critical level where vaccine manufacturers no longer were going to make the vaccines.
Oh.
Because the liability claims were going out.
Wow.
Going off the roof. And I'm not going to defend the profitability of pharmaceuticals. I have my issues with that as well.
Well, yeah, but
at the
right
same
to make
time,
business decisions,
if you are going to if you're going to lose money on producing a product, whether the claims are frivolous or not frivolous or whatever,
you still have to defend.
They said we can't do it. And the government, in order to provide security to vaccine production, developed the fund as a way to actually analyze these and keep them out of the regular court system.
Okay.
Which we know the court system can be kind of creative in its verdicts and its awards. And the awards can be disproportionate to the world.
Especially if a jury's deciding, it can be a real wild
And
card.
an autistic child sitting in front of a jury is a moneymaker. Which yes, that child has been injured by some form, but that's the problem. What I know of autism, which is in many ways frustrating as well, what an autistic child is not the same as another autistic child.
So there are degrees.
There are huge degrees. The other problem is it's not at all clear what the etiology of autism is. For it to be vaccines, I have some problems with that in that I had autistic children in my practice that never were vaccinated.
Really?
So how did vaccine be the only sole cause? That becomes weak if you start looking at it. We know that a lot of the damage of very heavily affected children with autism shows developmental issues such as brain neurological patterns that couldn't have occurred backwards. So it was something that occurred in utero or occurred very early in life. The whole problem we run into with many claims with vaccines, and I see the problem, is that children develop a lot in the first 2 years. They do a lot of development or they don't.
Of course, yeah.
And when are we giving vaccines? Well, we give them at the point that they're at the highest risk for that disease. Rotavirus, once you're a year old, not so bad a disease. Hepatitis B, if you contract it through the birth canal, you have a 90+% chance of having chronic hepatitis. If you get it somewhat older, much lower risk. So there are timing issues.
So that alone then, that the fact that somebody can contact it through the process of being born, obviously is a reason why the vaccine is important. Laura Condon's statement here on my show was that should not be given to babies because that's contracted basically through sex, and infants don't have sex.
It's a simple way of answering. Well, it's a simple way of saying something that sells. But the issue is basically the immune system of an infant is not the same thing as the immune system of an older child or adolescent.
Now, would a preemie be more susceptible to that just
that's
because
pretty much
their
any
system?
newborn. No, pretty much any newborn.
Okay.
And that's the reason, when we held the vaccine, because of the thimerosal discussion a decade ago or so, we had kids who actually contracted hepatitis B at that time, unknown. At one time, we were only treating kids where the mother was testing positive for hepatitis B. We weren't making much of a change.
Now, is a lot of that from drug abuse?
From whatever exposure. I mean, it can be any exposure at all.
Okay.
But we weren't really getting to dropping the level of hepatitis B in infants until we went to a universal pattern where we gave it to all the infants that the parents allow it for. A parent can refuse it. They can refuse any vaccine.
Do many?
Well, it depends on the practice you're in. I did not excuse patients from the practice because I wanted to be able to talk to them about what I thought. And the American Academy of Pediatrics has made a very clear statement that they ask you not to excuse patients for refusal of vaccines, one or any of them. I felt it was important.
Well, legal discrimination
issues
could factor in there too.
Well, it's even worse than that, in that there have been lawsuits of physicians who did not give a varicella vaccine to a patient who went to school. Another girl got the vaccine, became injured from chickenpox, and the parents sued the doctor for not having provided the vaccine.
Not the parent, for making that decision.
Well, for allowing the parents not to be vaccinated.
But a doctor can't force anybody to do anything.
Here's the
You
problem.
can only recommend to us, but we don't have to do what you suggest.
So we have a problem.
Yeah.
So, this is why a number of doctors do excuse, is they don't want to take the risk of the people who have acquiesced to getting the vaccines, who have said, okay, I get the benefit over the risk, which we all have to do. They don't want their patients to be at risk because of parents who choose not to go that route and all. This is the real mess of ethics behind it. There are really kind of 3 levels of ethics, if you want to hit on those. I don't know if you want to.
Sure, go ahead.
One is the right to refuse. We had a House bill come up 2-3 years ago, and it did not make it through, to expand to a philosophical objection from the religious objection. We know that in states where a philosophical objection is used, their recurrence of disease rates are higher.
And philosophical could be anything.
Could be anything.
Could be, I don't like the color of the vaccine.
Religious, it seems unfortunate that that's what we go to in a way, but at the same time, it makes people think twice. And I think thinking twice is not a bad thing when you decide the welfare of your child, okay? part of in my office, we've always had forms that you had to sign before you gave the vaccine. I actually created a form that they had to sign that they were refusing the vaccine. And by
Well, I think
having
that's
them
a
actually,
safe thing for you
well,
to do
it was
as a
partly it was
practitioner.
partly liable, but it was also an active process. They had
Yeah.
to actively say, "I refuse."
Yeah,
A number of parents actually saw that, and it made them uncomfortable
really.
to say, "Wait, I have to actually sign saying I'm not going to do
Really?
something." And I said, "Well, yeah, because you're choosing an active
Yeah,
process."
yeah.
And they thought twice about it. They signed it if they really didn't want them. And so there's that issue. And I was asked at a hearing this last spring, when we were talking about refinancing the way that vaccines are financed in New Hampshire, by a senator, a state senator. He said, his last question to me was, should vaccines be mandatory? And I'm like, absolutely not. What I did miss putting in, however, for those parents who have considered it and have thought carefully about it, it should be at least funded so they can get them. But there are other ways you could phrase that that are a little more derogatory. But the end point is that at the same time, you should be able to
You
refuse
can
it.
tell it like it is on this show, you know.
The next part of it is, well, I hear that in the title. But
Yeah,
anyway, the
yeah,
next
yeah,
part of that is,
exactly.
why should people have to go out, pay for vaccines, put their child at risk, according to viewpoints, so that other people can get a free ride off of them? If we get enough kids vaccinated, we protect a lot of kids around us.
Sure.
Adults as well. We've
Yeah,
actually
sure.
seen the rates
Sure.
of disease, pneumococcal disease, influenza, come down when the kids are vaccinated in a household. The adults are at less risk.
Well, that makes sense.
And that's
Because
what
the
we're
kids
saying.
aren't
It's a
dragging
herd
it home.
immunity is
Yeah,
what they call
yeah.
it, which is an unfortunate
Yeah.
thing to think of us all as cows, but that's what it is. We have herd immunity. So that herd immunity protects kids who have not been vaccinated. Well, that's good for kids who can't get vaccine. But that's a luxury. That's a selfish luxury for people who refuse a vaccine, that these other children are providing protection for their kids. The other ethical...
Well, that's kind of the way I tend to look at it, to
Well,
be
and
honest
that's the
with
way people used to see it pretty readily until I don't know what the cultural change was. And then the last thing
well,
that, of
maybe
course...
the me generation, you know.
I was going to
Can-
say that,
can
but I'll
kind
let
of
you say it,
factor in,
actually.
you know.
I'll let you have that one. And the last one is that if there is an affordable, reasonable way to protect somebody from something, it should be readily available to people. So funding vaccines to a point that people who actively choose to get them should have them seems only fair and ethical.
Well, yeah, but that's...
And that's...
I mean, that's kind of like a whole different argument, because then,
well, it's
you know, you
levels
could-
of the ethics involved.
Yeah, I mean, you could say that everybody should get a free medical exam too, because it's good for them.
Well,
and,
there's a
you know.
long discussion. We won't get into
Yeah,
that discussion
I know.
today.
I mean, then we'll start arguing about
Now we're going to get into
Obamacare or something.
we're going to
Yeah,
get into
really,
universal
yeah.
health care. And we'll leave that one alone.
Yeah.
As a pediatrician, what I see in pediatric health care, our system does not work well. So
Now let's just ask this with this whole organization there. The reports, you know, that I mentioned, kind of coincidentally dropped down after some of the theories that autism, for example, was caused by vaccines, when that quelled down because medical science was saying, well, we can show it's not.
well,
how are
more
these-
we can
how are
say
these-
medical science can't show that
Right,
they're
okay,
linked.
okay.
We can't show anything not.
Okay,
We can
okay.
show that we don't
Yeah,
see the
good point.
association. Okay.
Good point. But where do these reports come from? I mean, are they coming from doctors' offices, or are they coming from, like, for instance, I as a parent can submit a report that will be part of that official report
To the VAERS or to the injury?
to the...
Injury is actually, I think, investigated by the staff of the injury.
But I mean, anybody
And
can supply the
I would
report,
think
correct?
I would think it could come from anybody, but I'd have to look that up to be sure how that's done.
Now,
It's not just
I
a
may have
doctor-driven.
misinterpreted, because again, you know, I'm certainly not an expert in any way, shape, or form in anything medical. But just from what I read, you know, when I was trying to research this to kind of know more about it, I got the distinct impression that most of the reports are coming from persons, people, parents,
I
not
think some
from
reports are coming that
doctors'
way.
offices or hospitals or so on.
Again, I would have to look it
So,
up
I
myself.
mean, are these objective reports or are these totally
Well,
subjective reports because it happens to be your kid that
is
you worked
there
up about?
is there an objective report?
Well, yeah.
When it comes to something as
Yeah, well,
devastating
yeah, I
as
think there is,
autism,
because, I mean, if it's my kid,
I'd
I'm
want an
certainly going to be more emotionally vested in the
I
whole
would want a
subject
reason
than
why
if
my
it's your
child has
kid.
autism.
Well, yeah,
I don't want it to be genetics.
but that doesn't mean
I
that
don't want it to be a toxic exposure that
agree.
I could have avoided. I
I
don't want
agree.
it to be. I don't want it to be. And the
You-
parallel thing that's going on is vaccine.
But
It would make-
well, I agree with everything you're saying, but by
Yeah.
the same token, as a human being, I know that something that personally affects me, I'm more likely to try to find a reason because of the fact I'm affected. And my thought process
But your
could
passion.
very well be more influenced by my emotional
Yes.
reaction to this rather than my knowledge of the subject.
Oh, I have no
Do you see
question
what I
that can
mean?
happen. That can
So,
happen.
so that's why I guess the fact that what I read indicated that a lot of these so-called reports weren't coming from doctors' offices or from hospital statistics or whatever, but were coming from the people who very definitely have an understandable emotional involvement in it.
That's my perception. To answer that is knowing the answer, I don't have that. I'd have
Okay.
to look that up myself.
Okay. Okay.
That was the perception I've had with it. The whole issue of autism is frustrating.
Yeah.
And that it's
Oh,
it's a
yeah.
very
Of
frustrating
course it is.
condition. In fact, I have family members who are in the autism spectrum, the Asperger's spectrum, and they have not been diagnosed until they were adults.
So they led an
And some have not been
otherwise,
diagnosed yet
I
as well.
take it they led an otherwise normal life.
Very limited as to their the issues with communication, with interaction.
Yeah, but there are people like that without autism.
But some of them actually would be diagnosed now with autism.
All you have to do is
That
turn on
would
TV,
not
you
have
can
been.
see
They
what's
would not
going
have
on,
been.
you know?
But this is kind of a big issue that you run into, is that the criteria for autism is substantially different than when I was training. We are much more liberal in using it. I've had psychologists or psychiatrists actually say, I will give the diagnosis knowing that it may be retracted to make sure that the child can get what services they need. And we know that for a fact, that we are more liberal in giving the diagnosis to get the child a prescription for services,
So then
even though it may be modified.
all 100%
It's messy. In fact, as I understand it, Miss McCarthy's child isn't even autistic, was the last I've heard of that.
Oh, no kidding.
He has a seizure disorder
And she's the
with
woman who
regression.
started the organization.
Yep.
Wow.
That puts us in another bind as to, these are misdiagnoses sometimes. And yes, that's our fault for not having. At the same time, I'm now screening in my office, when I was screening patients at 18 and 24 months actively for autism.
You are.
Where when I trained, there was no such thing.
Yeah,
So
I
we
can
are
remember-
looking
I
harder
can remember
for
way
it.
back when, believe it or not, I started out in nursing school, and I can remember back then that they claimed autism was caused by a disattachment with mom. That mom,
So it's all mother's fault.
yeah.
I don't think we'd want to
That-
go with
I
that
know.
being the
But
reason
that
now
years
again.
ago, that's what
but
they
that,
used to say.
and it was. It was
Yeah.
it was a parenting issue
Yes,
at that point.
exactly.
You're absolutely right.
Exactly, and there were many women who were very
I'm not
heartbroken
sure
because
that
of
we'd
that.
feel very good about going back
No,
to that
no,
as the
I
reason
agree.
anymore.
I agree. So, I mean,
So vaccines
obviously-
are much more comfortable.
Yeah. Now, I'm going to throw out just a couple of things that jumped out at me during the anti-vaccine show. And then we're getting tight on time, so I'm going to then ask you a question that's very important to me because I have a personal interest in it,
Yes.
as we all have a personal interest in something. Ms. Condon did make some claims in the first show that I would like to hear addressed by somebody in medicine. She does feel as though there's been more cases of shingles ever since chickenpox vaccines started being given.
That one I'd like to see the statistics because I've seen the other.
Okay.
Okay.
She did say that the statistic she had was that last year, which I assume she meant 2012, that only 1,500 people in the United States died of the flu. And she did say that that price doesn't warrant doctors pushing all of us to get flu shots. And, I mean, I'm kind of thinking 1,500 people dead from the flu. I don't know.
That's kind of casual in my world.
Well, yeah,
At the same time, it's the complications of flu that are often the issues.
Yeah.
People don't necessarily die
especially
of
if you're a certain
well,
age
they don't
and everything else.
die of the flu as much as they die of the secondary pneumonias you get from having the flu.
Yeah.
So that's the precision of that makes it a hard one to answer because it's not really. I rarely do see flu as the cause of death. It's usually a complication.
Something that came as a
so
result,
you know, if you're diabetic, if you're premature, if you have asthma, your risks are very different than if you're a healthy person.
So much worse,
So again, that one I'd have to know where that statistic comes from.
Well, and kind of at the end of the show, she said that, in her opinion, and apparently of the organization, that people need to focus more, not worry so much about falling for vaccination hype, but should focus more on their own personal hygiene and lifestyle choices.
We all know that. That's true.
Well, I mean, yeah, it has something to do with
but
stuff.
We know that washing your hands is a huge health measure.
Well, of course it is. But does that mean...
But we still send our kids to school when they're sick.
Exactly.
So, yeah, her point is very well said. Will that take care of the flu epidemics? I don't think so.
Oh, well, I don't either, but I wanted to hear
but
you
in
say it.
But in the long run, those are absolutely credible statements. But theirs only go so far.
I'm not sure I'd agree they're credible. I mean, and,
well,
and I'm not dissing her.
Well, hygiene,
I mean,
hygiene
I let her know
and
from
lifestyle,
the get-go
we know that those are huge issues.
Well, yeah, of course they are. I mean, if you eat, 100 pounds of meat a week, you're going to probably be too heavy and so on. Yeah, a lot of things, yeah. All right, this one is the one that's important to me, so I'm going to slide it in. What are the health conditions that somebody might have? And I did talk with you about personal stuff in one of our conversations. A health condition that somebody might have, which I do, that makes him or her more susceptible to any exposure to people who have opted to not have vaccinations. Now, obviously, anybody could be at risk of exposure and contracting something, but aren't there certain medical conditions that kind of open the door so much more for you to be affected unwittingly by somebody who doesn't worry if their kid gets chicken pox or whatever?
There are a lot of different elements to that. Newborns, for instance, are highly susceptible to whooping cough pertussis. And that's part of the drive to get
and everything haven't developed
their immune system handles it very differently. The lung development issues. The parents, and there's an active push to get the parents and grandparents and siblings vaccinated to act as a cocoon around that child, because we can't start the vaccine until 2 months old. So immaturity, a novel immune system, prematurity where it's even more novel, those are high risk. People who have had altered immune status, chemotherapy, and it depends on the type and the regime you're getting. People who have natural immune deficiencies. The bubble boy is the example we all remember from our generation.
I do. Yeah.
People who have not had the disease, so they're susceptible. And depending on the type of disease, meningococcal disease can devastate anybody at any age. So it's not an age-related. We do it at the age we do it because we know adolescents who go off to college dormitories end up having a 5-time rate of the regular population. So there are reasons why the timing is done. But immune deficiencies
is
your...
who have had organs removed also?
Well, that usually if you've had your spleen removed, you would be more susceptible to...
Because that's like a filter, right?
Pneumococcals, Haemophilus, the encapsulated organisms, we call it. That is one of the filters. If you've had certain cancers, it's a combination of not just the cancer, but the chemotherapy that goes with the cancer. But then again, without the chemotherapy and without the surgery,
Well, yeah, because chemotherapy and
it's
so
going
on
to
does
change
do
the course.
some damage too, in addition to
It
doing
knocks
some
down
good.
your immune
Yeah,
system
yeah,
substantially.
yeah.
But at the same time, without it, longevity is heavily affected. So those are the issues you run into. Most of it has to do with immune systems. I'm sure I'm missing something there, but it's immaturity and immune
Well, you know, some people
alteration.
call me a hard nose, and if they want to, they can. I don't care. And I try to be fair on any subject that we cover, but I'm also known for putting my own opinion in on occasion.
I've caught that.
You think?
Yeah.
And I mean, I'll be honest with you. I don't see a whole heck of a lot of difference. And Laura Condon will probably hate me forever. I don't see a whole lot of difference between somebody who, because of their personal rights and choice, decide that they or their children aren't going to be vaccinated and run the risk of getting something that they can then pass on to other unsuspecting people. I don't see much of a difference between that and somebody getting in a car who's stinking drunk and risking the lives of and safety of everybody who happens to be on the road at the same time as them. To me, in my head, which is maybe not the most intelligent in the world, I don't see a lot of difference.
I don't know that I would go that far.
Well, I've been told that a few times.
I'm willing to accept that people can give me reasons to withdraw a little bit, or
Yeah,
somewhat,
yeah.
or even very good reasons sometimes.
Yeah.
What I really have had the hardest time with is the inflexibility of any one stance on any one issue. I allowed
Well, yeah.
patients to stay in my
Yeah.
practice who were not vaccinated. I would continue to talk about them. But I have a sense from many of the folks who are anti-something, whether it's in Congress this year or whatever, is that if you don't see my viewpoint, it's not that you're uninformed, it's not that you have a different opinion, it's that you're stupid.
Oh, that is such
Okay.
a prevalent thing.
And I would rather people
Yes.
be educated and
Yes.
informed and then make an active decision rather than just not be conform so you don't be called stupid. Okay.
You know, I'm looking at the clock because my cinematographer director, who
He
by
hasn't
the
started
way,
waving his hands. He hasn't started waving his hands
not yet, but I see him pacing. And by the way, we are in his studio today at Castle Hill Productions, which is a great change of scenery.
nice.
And have to give him a little plug there. And we literally are running the clock now. So I'm going to ask you this. What do you think, you as a doctor, you sitting here today, you as an expert, what do you think is the most important thing for our audience to take away from today, from the show?
They need to know what the benefits and the risks are and make a personal decision based on that for their children, as a proxy for their child, as a proxy for themselves. If you don't get educated, if you just take the information that's being handed to you without thinking about it, whether it's a doctor, whether it's anti-vaccine, whatever, you're not doing you or your child a service. But you need to understand what the pros and cons are and make a decision based on what you come up with, not have someone else make it for you.
I'm going to ask you two personal questions. Are your kids vaccinated?
Absolutely.
And when you have grandchildren, if your kids decided that they didn't want your grandchildren vaccinated, would you fight them on it?
I wouldn't fight them, but I'd discuss it.
You'd let your opinion be known.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. That's a good message to send out to our audience. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I hope you learned something from this show, and the doctor's email address will be on screen for you. I think this is a pretty important topic, particularly as it has become one of the, for lack of a better description, popular causes that we're witnessing these days. And there's a whole lot of popular causes out there that, I don't know, may sound okay or may sound like, hey, let people do their thing. But, you know, people can do their thing as much as they want. But where their right to do it stops is at my front door when it can affect my family and me. And I think a lot of you might agree with that thought. So, having said that, I hope you learned a lot from the show. Do watch the other one to hear the other point of view. Definitely come back for our next show. Till then, Bye-bye.